Well, Stephen, we're sitting here getting acquainted a little bit.
Getting to know each other, yeah.
Yes, as they say. And we were talking, I find it very interesting that a man who scares other people with his books and his novels and short stories and all has some things that he's afraid of.
I got a lot of things I'm afraid of.
Like what?
It may seem hard to believe, but Stephen King has been terrifying readers for over 50 years at this point, crafting best-selling novels and short stories that have become iconic works of horror. Of course, with these written works have come a plethora of film adaptations, some very good,
Red rum,
some not so good. When King's frequent adaptation producer Dino De Laurentiis hired King to direct a movie adapted from his own short story, Trucks, he didn't care that King had never made a movie before, or that King was, self-admittedly, at the height of his days ingesting this stuff. King was bankable, interested in directing, and one of De Laurentiis' people, having previously written the scripts for both Cat Eyes and Silver Bullet for him, and De Laurentiis took care of his people.
It's obvious that I didn't get the job because I'd made brilliant student films at Berkeley Film School or NYU Film School. I never went to film school. I didn't get a shot at directing because I'd done brilliant TV the way that Steven Spielberg did when he made Sugarland Express. I got the job because I was Stephen King. I think Dino De Laurentiis probably had two reasons for that. One of them is that he's sort of a magnificent gambler at heart. He's the last of the true entrepreneurs. He will roll the dice. And he thinks to himself, well, Stephen King has written a lot of books that have enough cinematic appeal so they've been bought for films. Maybe he can do it. And I also think that there was a canny side where he thought maybe the book buyers will come back into the theaters where they really haven't been since The Shining, and maybe there'll be a certain freakish curiosity value. You know, Samuel Johnson said about women preachers and dancing dogs, you don't come expecting to see it done well. You come because you're so surprised that anybody does it at all, you know.
This is how we ended up with 1986's Slayer machine movie, Maximum Overdrive.
This machine just called me an asshole.
To enjoy this movie is to unabashedly embrace Schadenfreude. Full of nose candy-fueled hubris, King uses the movie's trailer to call a shot, staring directly into the camera as though Stanley Kubrick's complete creative control over The Shining is on the other end of the side. He sees.
A lot of people have directed Stephen King novels and stories, and I finally decided if you want something done right, you ought to do it yourself.
Declaring that your directorial debut and third feature-length screenplay will be better than that of one of the most revered modern filmmakers is a bold move. Let's see how it plays out for him.
This machine just called me an asshole.
Taking equal parts premise from Steven Spielberg's Duel, James Cameron's Terminator, and King's Christine, Maximum Overdrive twists this intriguing concoction into new realms, from a comet's tail suffocating Earth's orbit. Previously inanimate objects come to life, ranging from weapons to electric signs, home electronics to vehicles, lawnmowers to an electric knife, and they start to get a little hostile, to say the least. But for what reason? Vengeance? Union rights? A more rigorous maintenance schedule? A small group of individuals are held under siege in a Dixie Boy truck stop by a bevy of fierce killer vehicles. As the time passes, diesel trucks keep coming, with an endless thirst for gas. For some reason, the gas pumps are layabouts. While the meat slicers are more than happy to join the fun. The group has an idea. If they can get to a boat, they can escape to an area with no electricity. It's just a matter of temporarily outwitting the trucks. King has a history of dealing with deadly, malevolent vehicles in his works. Besides trucks, King's writings that deal with sentient or killer-driven vehicles include Christine, from a Buick 8, Mr. Mercedes, and the novels Mile 81, in which a car literally eats people, and Throttle, co-written with Joe Hill. Not to mention King characters trapped in a car, like in Cujo, involved in a debilitating accident, like in Misery, given a lift by an off-putting ghost in Riding the Bullet, run afoul of a cross-country traveling demon in a haunted painting, like in The Road Virus Heads North, or driving through parallel dimensions filled with monster trees to cut down on commute time, like in Mrs. Todd's Shortcut. Putting his apparent love for malicious automobiles aside, what's always been fascinating about Maximum Overdrive is that why, out of all the stories he's written, King chose this to be the only movie he directed. Conceptually, it's an incredibly ambitious story with a lot of technical aspects. Machines coming to life, explosions, copious amounts of stunts and destruction that may have been better served by a more seasoned director, or at least one who could keep focus throughout production. That being said, one can't help but applaud in King's ballsiness to attempt making this movie, even if it was a bit ill-conceived.
How frightened were you about directing this movie?
Scared to death. It took 3 weeks before I realized that I was doing it the wrong way, because I was not doing it the way that I'd written all my novels, which is pretty much by instinct, by guts and by gosh. My motto has always been, people will say, do you outline? And my idea is if you can't remember what your idea was, it was a bad idea. You know, it's just as well that you forgot it. And I went into it with something in mind that I'd read Alfred Hitchcock had said. He said that the dullest part of making any movie was the actual shooting, because he knew everything that he was going to do. He'd planned it all in advance. And as a guy who'd never done it before and knew that there was going to be a crew of, let's say, 80 people who had probably made, you know, the grips on the picture would have made more movies, worked on more movies than I'd ever made in my life.
What is it about this stuff right here that amplifies one's confidence to such a high degree? Stephen King promised audiences a scary automotive thriller, only to produce a film of empty ideas. But what a brash accident Maximum Overdrive was. Sure, there's some hefty analytical discourse waiting to be found here. Perhaps it's a post-gas crisis allegory about overconsumption, or a diatribe about the consumer-crazed 80s, or something about the rarity of a literary figure being given the keys to movie making only to blow it.
Stephen, the theme of this movie, Maximum Overdrive, which is machines taking over the world and destroying the world and people and so forth, is there some message there that you're trying to convey to us?
Well,
has technology gone too far?
I don't know how to answer that question. I think this is a moron movie, okay? I think that, and I mean that in the best sense of that term. I think Splash was a moron movie. Nobody believes in mermaids. Come on, give me a break. But it was a great movie. There should be movies where you can sort of check your brains at the box office and pick them up 2 hours later. And yet, there are also moron movies, which are what I think of as perfect entertainment pictures, you know, where they hit that sublime note of idiocy that can be mistaken for social satire. I remember reading a long piece in the Village Voice about Dawn of the Dead, saying George Romero has created the perfect satire of a consumer society where people finally end up eating each other. And George just read that and laughed and said, gee, I thought it was a horror picture.
But honestly, that hoity-toity stuff goes straight out the car window the second a Pee-wee baseball player's head gets demolished by a steamroller. One can only assume that it was all this stuff right here that decided that the main evil truck needed to have a literal face and found a semi with the giant fiberglass face of Spider-Man's Green Goblin on its front grille. This stuff right here decided that a drive-through speaker should say,
"This is for my dad, you not enough son of a bitch."
This stuff right here decided that one of the machine victims of the montage earlier in the movie should be a dead dog with a remote control car stuck in its mouth. This stuff right here possessed Ellen McAuliffe when she gave her over-the-top "We made you" speech.
We made them. You can! We made you!
Well, let that be a lesson to you, Steve. Just because they like your books, a great cinematic mind, it does not make you. You have to hand it to King, though. At least in later interviews, he has admitted he created a, quote, moron movie. So at least he had got one of his assessments of the 80s adaptations of his works correct. Because, let's be clear, Kubrick's transcendent The Shining is a masterpiece. And even Mark Lester's tremendously fun Firestarter is nowhere near the, quote, flavorless cafeteria mashed potatoes he once dismissed it as.
Adios, motherfucker!
Maximum Overdrive ultimately crawls to a close with another brick of text letting us know that a UFO was destroyed by a Russian satellite, and 6 days later, the Earth passed out of the comet's tail. Okay. Thanks? What does the UFO have to do with anything? Was that the cause of the trucks and not the comet? Why bring aliens into this now? Did the attack in electronics stop then? Or after the comet went away? Or never? The movie doesn't tell us. Talk about a non-climax.
Curtis, when can we get off this boat? You know I get seasick.
Also worth noting, as previously stated, this movie was indeed produced by Dino De Laurentiis, who also served as producer on several other film adaptations of King's work, as well as a few of the Halloween movies, a couple of the Amityville movies, Conan the Barbarian, Conan the Destroyer, Army of Darkness, and Flash Gordon, among about a bajillion other movies.
Yo, mama.
This team up alone should let you know what you're getting into if you watch this movie. Don't expect Oscar-winning performances or heart-to-heart moments worthy of vast quantities of tears. In fact, don't really expect much of anything other than mayhem, ridiculous plot points, and straightforward, one-dimensional characters presented in a pre-packaged manner for your convenience and consumption.
That's what I was doing before every machine in the world went into maximum overdrive.
In other words, set the bar low and you won't be disappointed. Maximum Overdrive is a demented amalgam of genre film elements that combine to make an unusual hybrid flick that entertains more than it horrifies. Unique and unflattering, the movie attempts to tread lightly on the horror aspects of its story and instead focuses on its more outlandish and diverse world. With its rock interlaced soundtrack and adventurous nature, this film comes off as a sci-fi adventure more than anything, and that's alright. Fans of bad movies and King adaptation fans alike are in for something special, especially if watching with like-minded friends. It's full of wonder. Wonder how intelligent a military mule has to be to learn Morse code. Wonder, do machines dream of steampunk sheep? Wonder if the prominence of a 7 feet tall Green Goblin mask on the grill of the featured truck means this counts as a Marvel movie?
Harry tells me you're quite the science whiz. You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
Ironically, Stephen King's attempt to eliminate bad adaptations of his work by making this film himself had the opposite effect. His embarrassment over the movie has been well documented. When asked why he hasn't directed a film since, this was his answer: just watch Maximum Overdrive.
Stephen, now that you see the picture, do you think this is the best Stephen King work transferred to film?
Only in one way. I think that finally the people who write me after every film version and say they ruined it. Well, you can't ruin a book. That's one of the reasons that I've continued to sell to Hollywood, because in spite of the fact that you don't really know what's going to happen. There was a film graduate student who came to interview James M. Cain near the end of Cain's life, and Cain was a guy who had a lot of books turned into films. There was Postman Always Rings Twice, which has been made 2 or 3 times. Double Indemnity, is Mildred Pierce Serenade, a bunch of them. And this guy started to moan and complain, and then he asked that question that's so much like, are you still beating your wife? He said to Cain, what do you think about the way Hollywood's ruined all your books? And Cain whipped right around and he pointed to the shelf behind him and said, didn't ruin one of them, Sonny, they're all right up there. You can't ruin a book. A book is film-proof. Film is more ephemeral. So in that sense, it's never really bothered me at all, but I think what the fans mean when they say they ruined your book is that whatever that heart is, or the feeling of the writer that's between the lines almost, you know, that makes the heart of the book, wasn't in the film. And this time it's there. This film is vulgar in places, it's very frightening in places.
Is it grisly?
There are places where it's a bit grisly. There are places where the critics are going to say Stephen King continues to practice the gospel of nothing succeeds like excess. But at the same time, there's enough of the heart, that there's enough, I think, of the sort of good humor and sort of straight-ahead drive that the stories have, so that I think people are going to come out of it and say, yeah, it was great. It is the best.